In a small, crowded hospital in Mbale, Uganda, the wind howled outside as rain beat hard against the windows. Inside, Nanjala lay on a worn-out hospital bed, soaked in sweat, a face twisted in pain. She was in deep labour, struggling with each breath. Her husband, Kamau, stood by the door with a scowl on his face. A nurse whispered something to him. It was going to be a girl. His face turned cold. Without a word, he stepped back, then muttered, "I have no use for daughters." Nanjala reached out, her eyes wide with fear. "Please don't leave me," she begged. But Kamau had already turned away and stormed out into the rain. Her cries echoed in the room. Suddenly, machines beeped loudly, and the nurses rushed in. One shouted, "She's losing too much blood!" Another yelled, "Get her to surgery, now!" They wheeled Nanjala through the narrow hallway as thunder roared. Her eyes fluttered shut, her strength fading. The doctors looked at each other. They knew time was running out. As the storm raged on outside, a different storm was happening inside. A fight to save a mother and a baby no one thought deserved to live. Rain poured harder outside as the hospital lights flickered. Inside the small, dim surgery room, everything was tense. Nanjala lay still, pale and weak, her body trembling. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, full of fear, then slowly closed again. She had lost too much blood, and her breathing was shallow. The nurses around her moved quickly, checking her vitals, whispering to each other with worry in their eyes. One of them ran out to call the doctor. Dr. Akiang, a young woman in her 30s with steady hands and strong eyes, rushed in. She took one look at Nanjala and knew this was serious. The baby was breech, not coming out head first, and Nanjala was far too weak for a normal delivery. A sharp clap of thunder echoed outside, but Dr. Achieng stayed calm. "We don't have time," she said firmly. "We must operate now." Other doctors hesitated. Some looked nervous, but Dr. Achieng stood tall. "I'm not giving up on her, not today." She quickly put on her gloves and mask and led the team. The room turned quiet, except for the beeping machines and the sound of rain hitting the roof. As the surgery began, Nanjala's heartbeat slowed. The nurses exchanged worried glances. Her body was shutting down, but Dr. Achieng focused only on saving her and the baby. She worked fast, her hands steady even as sweat dripped down her forehead. She whispered to herself, "Hold on, Nanjala, just a little longer." The power blinked out for a second. Gasps filled the room. The backup generator kicked in just in time. A nurse wiped Nanjala's forehead, gently whispering, "You're not alone. We're here." Dr. Achieng carefully reached for the baby. It was stuck, twisted in a difficult position. She paused, took a deep breath, and tried again. She had done this before, but never with a mother this close to death. The rain pounded harder. The hospital shook with wind. One nurse silently said a prayer. "Come on," Dr. Achieng whispered, guiding the baby gently. Minutes felt like hours. Then suddenly, movement, a tiny shoulder, then a head. One more push, and the baby slipped into her hands. The room froze. Everyone held their breath. For a second, the baby didn't move. Then, a loud, sharp cry filled the room. The sound was strong, beautiful, full of life. One nurse let out a sob. Another covered her mouth in shock. Dr. Achieng smiled behind her mask, tears forming in her eyes. "She's alive," she said softly. They wrapped the baby in a warm cloth. She was small but healthy and crying louder now, but it wasn't over. Dr. Achieng turned back to Nanjala. Her heart was still beating, but faint. They gave her oxygen, stitched her wounds, and worked fast to stop the bleeding. She had lost so much blood that it was a miracle she was still alive. Slowly, slowly, her breathing evened out. The machines calmed. The storm outside began to fade. The worst had passed. Dr. Achieng stepped back, exhausted but proud. Her gown was soaked with sweat and blood, but her eyes were full of hope. She looked down at the tiny baby in the nurse's arms, and then at Nanjala, still unconscious but alive. "She fought," Dr. Achieng whispered. "They both did." Everyone in the room felt it. This wasn't just a birth. It was a miracle. A mother, left to die, had survived. A child, unwanted by her own father, had arrived with the strength of a warrior. And none of it would have happened without Dr. Achieng. the woman who refused to give up. The storm outside had not stopped. Thunder still roared across the sky, and the wind pushed against the old hospital walls. But inside the delivery room, something had changed. A new sound rose above the storm, a baby's cry, loud, strong, alive. The baby girl had finally arrived, and her voice filled the room with a kind of hope no one had felt in hours. Nurses moved quickly, wrapping her in soft cloth, checking her tiny body. Her skin was warm, her fingers tiny, but curled into little fists, ready to face the world. It was a moment of joy in the middle of fear. Dr. Achieng, tired but still alert, leaned over to examine the baby. She was smiling, relieved that both mother and child had survived. But then she paused. Something on the baby's chest caught her eye. She gently pulled the cloth down to take a closer look. There, just over the baby's heart, was a mark. A golden spiral, small but clear, like it had been painted by the wind itself. The room went quiet. One nurse gasped. Another stepped forward slowly. Dr. Achieng stared at the mark, her heart beating faster. "This can't be," she whispered. "This mark, it's not just a birthmark." The golden spiral wasn't random. It was shaped perfectly, in a way that looked familiar, too familiar. It looked exactly like a symbol Dr. Achieng had seen before. She had grown up in the same region, and she remembered hearing stories about that symbol. It was part of Kamao's tribal heritage, a sacred sign passed down through generations. Not everyone had it. Only a few children in the history of his clan were ever born with it, and those who were considered special, chosen, blessed. The nurses began to murmur among themselves. One of them said softly, "That's the sign of the Kalinga clan. It's their holy mark. Her father, Kamau, he has the same one." The room felt suddenly heavy, like time had slowed down. Dr. Achieng looked at the baby again. She was still crying, her tiny face red and strong. She had no idea what had just happened, how her body carried a symbol that could change everything. One nurse stepped outside to make a call. She didn't wait for permission. She dialed the number Kamau had left when he stormed out. The phone rang and rang. Finally, he picked up. His voice was cold, tired. "Is it over?" he asked. The nurse didn't answer at first. Then she said, "Your daughter is alive. She's healthy." Silence, then a sigh. "She has your mark," the nurse continued. "The spiral on her chest." Kamau didn't speak. The line was quiet for a long time. Inside the room, the baby stopped crying. She was calm now, her small chest rising and falling with each breath. Nanjala still lay unconscious, but her heart was steady. She had survived. Dr. Achieng gently handed the baby to a young nurse, her voice calm but full of emotion. "Watch over her. She's not just any baby." She turned to clean up the room, but her mind was spinning. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this child had just changed everything. Born during a storm, nearly lost in the middle of pain and rejection, yet she arrived with power in her lungs and a sign on her chest, a symbol that even Kamau, who had walked away from his wife and unborn daughter, could not ignore. This baby, so small, so new, had just become the bridge between the past and the future, between pain and healing, between shame and pride. Outside, the rain began to slow, the thunder moved farther away, and inside the hospital the air was different now, warmer, lighter, like something sacred had entered the room and stayed. Far away from the hospital, deep in the hills of Kamau's village, the storm had passed, but the air still felt heavy. Kamau sat alone in a small hut, staring at the wall, trying not to think. His mind replayed the moment he walked away from Najala at the hospital. Her voice begging him to stay still echoed in his ears, but he had silenced it with anger and pride. A girl, he had thought bitterly. What can a girl bring me? He felt no joy, only shame, for leaving her there in pain. He expected the worst. Then the phone rang. The sound startled him. He picked it up slowly, expecting to hear bad news, maybe that Nanjala hadn't made it. His hands trembled. He answered, not saying a word. On the other end, a nurse's calm voice spoke. "Kamau, you need to come to the hospital, right now." Her tone was serious, but not sad. He didn't ask questions. He stood up, grabbed his coat, and rushed out the door. His heart pounded as he walked through the muddy paths toward the nearby town, then took the first ride he could find to Mbali. The journey felt like forever. Every bump in the road, every minute ticking by, added to his fear. He imagined walking into a room filled with silence, with white sheets, with no more Nanjala. He imagined a funeral. He imagined guilt so deep he would never come out of it. When he arrived, the hospital looked small and tired, but lights still glowed inside. He walked in, his feet dragging, his eyes wide with dread. A nurse spotted him and walked over quietly. She didn't say much. She simply looked into his eyes, then reached behind her. And then she handed him a small wrapped bundle. Kamal blinked. "What is this?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Your daughter," the nurse said softly. Kamal froze. His hands shook as he took the baby. She was warm, soft, and so tiny. Her eyes were closed, but her little mouth moved slightly, like she was dreaming. He stared at her, confused, unsure. Then the nurse leaned in close and whispered the words that would change him forever. "She carries the same mark as your grandfather, the one your clan called sacred." Kamal's eyes widened. "What?" The nurse gently pulled back the cloth, just enough for him to see. There it was, right above her heart, a golden spiral, clear, bright, exactly like the one his grandfather used to show them during stories around the fire. The sacred symbol of their people, a sign of greatness, a sign that came once in a lifetime and always brought change. Kamal stepped back slightly, staring at the baby, at the mark. His knees felt weak. He slowly sat down in the hospital hallway, the baby still in his arms. The world around him disappeared. For the first time in years, tears began to form in his eyes. All his life, he believed sons carried the name. Sons held the power. Sons brought honor. But here she was, his daughter, carrying the most honored mark of all, something no son in his family had carried for generations. Whispers began to travel through the village quickly. The man who walked away from his wife, now holding a child marked by the ancestors. The girl he didn't want, now seen as a sign from the spirits. Some said it was fate. Some said it was punishment. Others said it was mercy. But in that quiet moment, Kamal could feel only one thing: shame. A heavy, burning shame. He thought of Nanjala, lying in that hospital bed, almost lost because of him. He thought of the fear in her eyes, the strength in her body, and the courage it took to face birth alone. He had failed her. He had failed his own heart. Still holding the baby, Kamal stood up slowly and asked the nurse, "Can I see her?" The nurse nodded and led him down the hall. At the door of the recovery room, Kamal paused. Nanjala lay in bed, pale and tired, eyes closed. But as he stepped in, her eyes opened slightly. She looked at him, at the baby in his arms. Her lips didn't move, but tears rolled down her cheeks. Kamal walked over and knelt beside her. He didn't know what to say. He placed the baby gently by her side and took Nanjala's hand in his. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I was wrong." She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The tears in her eyes said everything. Outside the room, the news had already begun to spread. The girl born during the storm, the girl with the golden spiral, the girl whose cry rose above thunder and brought change with her. Kamal sat in the hospital waiting room, his arms wrapped tightly around his chest, as if trying to hold himself together. The baby was sleeping in the nursery now, safe and calm. Nurses walked past him with quiet footsteps, but the hallway felt empty, cold. He had never felt this kind of silence before. Not outside, but inside his heart. He kept thinking about that tiny mark on his daughter's chest. The golden spiral, the sacred symbol, the very thing his grandfather once said would return only when the family was ready to change. And it had returned, but not on a son, on a girl. The same girl he had refused to accept. Kamal leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his face in his hands. He was not crying out of joy, not even relief. It was guilt, deep, cutting guilt, the kind that doesn't go away with time. He had walked away from Nanjala when she needed him the most. He had left her alone in pain, thinking she was giving him nothing by bringing a daughter into the world. But now he knew the truth. She had given him everything. And then another memory came, one that he had buried for many years. He saw his mother, her face bruised with sadness, sitting outside their old home after his father had shouted at her. "You only give me girls," his father had once screamed. Kamau remembered hiding behind the wall, watching as his mother cried into her hands. The shame, the silence, the way their village looked at her, as if she was less of a woman because she did not produce a son. One day, she left and never came back. Kamau never knew where she went. They never spoke of her again. And now, here he was, doing the same thing, saying the same words, hurting the woman who had trusted him, hurting the child who had just arrived, a child marked by something greater than any name or tradition. Kamau wiped his face roughly, but the tears wouldn't stop. He stood up slowly and walked to the recovery room again. He knocked once, quietly, then pushed the door open. Inside, Nanjala lay in bed, pale and weak. Her eyes were half open, her body still healing from the pain, the blood, the surgery. Her breathing was slow but steady. The moment Kamau saw her, his heart broke again, not just from guilt, but from how strong she still looked. Even in such weakness, she had faced death, alone, and still lived. He walked over gently, not wanting to startle her. He pulled a chair close and sat beside her bed. For a few seconds, he couldn't speak. His lips trembled, his throat felt tight. Then finally, he whispered, "I'm sorry, Nanjala." Her eyes blinked slowly, as if she was trying to understand. He reached out, touched her hand softly. She didn't pull away. "I left you," he said, his voice cracking. "I was angry. I was scared. I thought a daughter meant weakness, but I was the weak one. Not you. Never you." A single tear rolled down Nanjala's cheek. She couldn't speak yet, her body too tired, too broken from the fight. But her eyes said enough. She heard him. She felt his pain, and she forgave him without words. "I remember my mother," Kamau continued, his voice shaking. "They treated her like nothing, just because she gave birth to daughters, and I swore I would never be like my father. But I became him. I became the man who walked away." He lowered his head, his forehead resting on the edge of the bed near her hand. "But our daughter, she carries the mark, the sacred one. She's the one who came during the storm, the one who made me see." Nanjala blinked again, and another tear slipped down. "I don't deserve you," Kamau said softly, "or her, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to." He sat there for a long time, not asking for anything, not expecting anything, just being beside her, just letting his words fill the space where pain used to live. The wind outside had calmed, the night had grown quieter, the storm was truly over. A nurse peeked into the room, saw them both, and quietly closed the door again. Inside, in the soft light of that small hospital room, healing had begun, not just of a body, but of a heart, of a broken past, of a man who finally understood what it meant to love without limits. And even though Nanjala still couldn't speak, her tears said it all. She had heard him, she believed him, and deep inside, something had shifted, not just in that room, but in Kamau, forever. 1 year had passed. The sun shone brightly over the same village that once looked down on girls. Laughter filled the air as children ran through the dusty paths, and in the middle of it all was a little girl with big, curious eyes. Her name was Makena, the happy one, and she truly was. Her giggles were like music, and her smile lit up even the saddest faces. But Makena was more than just a happy child. She had become a symbol of change, a symbol of hope. People who once whispered cruel things about daughters now spoke proudly about Makena. Her story had travelled far. The storm, the birthmark, the second chance. It opened hearts that had been closed for years. The same elders who used to say, "Girls bring no value," were now helping build a scholarship fund for girls only, and they named it after Makena. And Kamau, the man who once walked away, he was now a different man, a man reborn. He didn't just stay by Makena's side, he led the way. He spoke at meetings, marched in parades, and visited schools, encouraging every father to stand up for their daughters. At a women's rally, he held Makena high in his arms. Around his neck hung a sign that said only 6 words, but it was enough to silence the world. My daughter saved me.